Cambridge United looked in grave danger of relegation going into April last season. A number of points adrift at that point, but 6 wins from their final 10 games kept Mark Bonner's side in League One for a third consecutive season. They've been on a big journey together, Cambridge and Mark Bonner. 2 incredibly successful first 2 seasons, full seasons in charge. Last season obviously brought its fresh challenges, but can Bonner come back bigger and better than ever before from that experience? It was some crucial work in January that managed to keep the U's in League One, but can they build from that, and can they grow as a club within League One? Well, to discuss all of these things and more, I'm delighted to be joined by the gents from the Abbey Stand Pod, Jordan and Jack Swindlehurst. Well, good afternoon as it's approaching now to you, gents. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Gav. Thanks for having us on. A good distraction from watching the Ashes.
Yeah,
you a cricket fan, Jack? Or?
Yeah, cricket fan, amateur player as well. So, yeah, it's nice to have a break from cricket for a while and talk about positive football.
The cricket is kind of echoing the end of our season there, Gab, where we need miracles. So I thought the summer would chill everything out, but it seems to be every sport I turn to, it's all about miraculous recoveries.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still getting a little bit of a crackle from the mic there, Jordan. I don't know if you can have a quick look into that. While you do, I'm going to a quick service announcement, which is the EFL Debate Summer Deep Dives are also available on YouTube and Spotify. Do give us a subscribe because it helps us out a lot. I'm covering all 72 clubs across the EFL between mid-June and mid-July, so you can go and check those out. Once you're done with this one, coming to you first then, Jack, how do you reflect on the Great Escape last season?
Yeah, it was a proper roller coaster season, unlike we've had in a number of years in regards to relegation. It was for 80% of it, it was quite miserable watching, really. You know, we went home and away and we didn't really get much. You know, performances were flat. There was quite a lot of talk about Bonner going. Obviously, there was rumours around him going to Rotherham, that kind of like upset the season a little bit. And yeah, it just felt really flat. And I mean, that last 10 or so games was amazing, but it's not very nice as a football fan to have your heart in your mouth like that the whole time. And we had a trip to Burton in the penultimate game, which we ended up losing 1-0. And that felt like that was it done and dusted, really. It just felt, you know, really defeated. But fair play to the boys and fair play to Mark Bonner for sticking at it. We did what we needed, and teams did us a favour on the final day. But yeah, we got there by the skin of our teeth, and it just feels good to be a League One team still.
Yeah, absolutely. Jordan, obviously there was an improvement in performances from January, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But I suppose the worry for Mark Bonner would be that in the middle of that campaign, there was a run of 3 wins in 27, which is obviously simple maths is that's three different runs of 1 win in 9, the equivalent of. So I think that that's probably, even though you were able to do the business at the right end of the season, it's probably prompted a bit of a rethink for Cambridge. And obviously you've released 10 players. So is this a bit of a rebuild this summer?
Absolutely, Gab. Yeah, I think this transfer window is probably the biggest one in Bonner's time at the club. It is the biggest rebuild, probably losing players that he wanted to keep as well. So yeah, really, really important summer for us. And I think if you ask any Cambridge fan why last year went as off the rails as it did, they would point you to the summer transfer window before the season started. So hopefully there's lessons learned from that. But it is a difficult situation to be in when you've got possibly the smallest budget in the league, if not the smallest one of, for sure. So identifying players is easy enough, but getting them, you know, over the line and into the club is a real difficulty. I think there's a lot to learn for the club and for the squad and for Bonds going into the season. And it's not just players that he's sort of been looking at in terms of sort of refreshing things. He's changed his assistant manager as well. Perhaps there's something in that, perhaps the way they were training or needing some new ideas behind the scenes during the week. Maybe that could see some benefit as well. But yeah, it feels like a really, really big summer for the club. And it felt like at the end of last season, although we were losing players that we didn't want to lose for either reasons because they were quality or for sentimental reasons, it did feel like that core group had perhaps come to sort of the end of its span together, which you quite often see in sports teams. So it'll be a difficult summer. It could be an exciting one, but hopefully the club have learned enough over the last few years to get everything in the right place.
Yeah, for sure. Let's hope that's the case. And one of the changes that Jordan alluded to there, Jack, was the change of assistant manager. I don't think there can be any question that Gary Woodcock was absolutely what Mark Bonner needed at the beginning of his career. But he sort of intimated, didn't he, that perhaps what he needed then and what he needed now are slightly different things. And you've brought in a coach in Kevin Betsy who probably struggled a little bit as a number one, but he certainly comes with high coaching pedigree, having worked with Arsenal under 23s.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, like you say, I think Waddock was just, such a great servant to the club and a great, assistant and confidant for Mark Bonner. But like you say, things kind of develop, and Bonner himself growing as a manager, Cambridge growing as a team and trying to kind of solidify themselves as a League One mainstay kind of means that, you might have to look elsewhere. So having someone like Kevin Betsy come in who's got that experience, also experience of managing England underage squads as well, it does just kind of bring an extra element. And I think, the proof will be in the pudding, but I do think he'll have a kind of good man management. He might be able to identify younger players as well that could come through and just nurture that talent. So I think he might just bring something, a bit more kind of variance, a bit more range. And yeah, I think he's a really good addition.
Yeah, well, let's hope that proves to be the case. Jordan, in terms of the additions on the field, you've brought in goalkeeper Jack Stevens from Oxford, you've brought in left-back Danny Andrew from Fleetwood, and you've loaned in Gaston Ahadmi, a striker from Ipswich. Ahadmi is probably the pick of the bench from my point of view in terms of the excitement over the players you've signed.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's probably the name that United fans were most aware of as well, even though the other two, to be fair, have quite a bit of League One experience under their belt. And I think from what we learned in January, where we were able to get a slightly more experienced player in, that's definitely something they've been looking for this summer. So yeah, maybe not as drawn to those names, but definitely think they could be good additions, especially Danny Andrew at left back. I've got my reservations over Stevens in goal. I think last year, Port Vale fans will tell you didn't have the best year. It seems like his Oxford career stagnated with was first choice and was highly rated. And I think
he had just on that, actually, Jordan, he did have one really good season for Oxford where, because for a long time he was behind Simon Eastwood, who's very much an Oxford United stalwart, and then Eastwood's form dropped off and Stevens came in, and his distribution that in 2021 looked really good. But then the following season, I think Stevens had a bit of a drop off, and then, like you mentioned, he had a tough time at Port Vale. So I think what Bonner will be hoping is that he can recover his form from a couple of seasons ago, which to an extent, you mentioned it yourself, Cambridge have got one of the lowest budgets in the league. You've kind of got to take that sort of chance. But
it reeks of a Mark Bonner signing, actually. Like, you look at all of the players that have come in and have done a good job for us, and some of them are still at the club and some have moved on. There's always seems to be a bit of a story behind them. Maybe they're not playing the best football or they're not getting into the team. And, I could list off numerous names, people like Adam May, Paul Digby and so forth. Paul Mullin would probably obviously be the biggest name there, where he was barely playing for Tranmere and signed for us and scored 30 goals. So it seems very Bonner-esque, this signing, to sort of sign someone who perhaps has had not a troubled couple of years, but sort of not the best couple of years. Looks to bring them under their window, and maybe, maybe the reason that we've done so well under Bonner over the last few years is that kind of sort of morale and camaraderie, and maybe sort of that backstory with players is what feeds into that. So yeah, perhaps Stevens will fit right into the squad and the way that we do things around here.
Yeah, absolutely. Jack, I thought performances really improved from January onwards, and even though the results didn't turn until April, it felt like there were a lot of games where you're just on the wrong side of fine margins. I saw the Fleetwood game where you had 3 chances and missed them, and Fleetwood scored their one, and the Ipswich, I think, was a competitive performance as well. And there are a few examples where Cambridge just couldn't quite get on the right side of those margins. So that brings me to 4 moves really in January: signing Ryan Bennett, signing Michael Morrison, recalling Liam Bennett. and also bringing in Conor McGrandles. I suppose in terms of this season, the unfortunate thing is that you've only got 2 of those still on the books.
Yeah,
big rumours about the third one, though, mate.
Yeah, it's interesting to know kind of how that's all going to go. But like you say, looking back, I mean, that was just a massive turning point for our season. You know, Conor McGrandles was a revelation, really. I don't know quite if we were expecting much or, you know, just a kind of extra body, but he just came in and revolutionised kind of. He joined the defence and the forwards together like we hadn't had all season. And we missed Adam May last season. There's no two ways about it. Paul Digby basically played every minute, but we really missed that kind of more creative midfielder. And he's also so good on the ball and a really good battler. And Liam Bennett was just, getting him back. He had really good game time at Walsall. They're obviously very fond of him. He came back in and just hit the ground running immediately and just played with such assurance for such a young player. And he's not a big player
as well, Jack, as well. Yeah. I think that's worth mentioning.
Absolutely. And all of those players mentioned collectively had their worst game at that Burton game, and it showed. But other than that game, it was, it just really did. And like you say, performances improved in January. It was a slow kind of upwards gradient, and it didn't appear like we had the time for that. But, Bonner kind of invested the trust and the time in them, and it eventually paid off. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. We were very lucky to stay up, and it was, with the assistance of other teams. But those players, literally, if you look at how many points we had in January and how many points we had coming the end of the season, those players coming in were directly kind of instrumental in us staying up and getting those points.
McGrandles was kind of an example, Gab, of where the season went right and wrong. Obviously, when he came in January, he turned things around, but he was a player that we targeted in the summer before and just couldn't get him through the door because we couldn't compete with the other clubs interested. And that kind of sort of summed up our sort of season. We're able to sort of identify players but not get them in. And I guess that's the big fear going into this summer, where we've only got, 3 new additions so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully there's more to come. Jordan, I feel midfield is looking like a key area because I was looking through the squad earlier. You've got Adam May, who I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's still injured.
I think he's on the way back. I think so he did his ACL really early last season. So that's normally about a year, isn't it? So I haven't seen any sort of news confirming.
But I think in terms of someone who's ready to hit the ground running, you'd maybe put a question mark there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So that leaves us with Thomas and Paul Digby. And I really feel like the challenge for Cambridge in recent years perhaps has been finding that partner for Paul Digby, because we know what we're going to get from Paul Digby. For me, he's a consistent 7 out of 10. To my eyes, he was probably the U's most consistent player last season. Feel free to disagree with that from point of view of someone who went every week, but that's kind of how I saw it. But you want someone who can add a bit of extra creativity next to him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think central midfield has been an issue for some time for the club. I think last season, going into the start of the season, I think we only had sort of 4 central midfielders on the books. One was a young player that didn't have much Football League experience. The other one was Liam O'Neill, who, whilst had the quality to play League One, certainly didn't have the luck with the injury. So we only really went in with sort of a starting 2, and then one did his ACL quite early on. So it feels like we're playing catch up for central midfield. McGrandles was a perfect fit. That's the kind of profile and character we'll need to be looking for this summer. But you're absolutely right. Central midfield is crucial for us. It's probably the linchpin signing that the club have to get right this season. Bonner sort of spoke about wanting sort of 7 or 8 names in this summer. We've already got 3, so that leaves sort of 4 or 5 to go. You've got to think that 1, maybe 2 people that can play central midfield must be on the cards, because you mentioned Thomas. Whilst he can play that deeper sort of midfield role, assuming that Bonner sticks with that 4-2-3-1, whilst he can play there, I think I'd rather see him closer to the striker, sort of in a 10 position. So I'm not sure I would. Yeah, I'm not sure I'd list him as a starting central midfielder.
How good can Thomas be this season, do you think?
Oh, he showed glimpses last year, but then he also showed glimpses of how his sort of career has gone to date, where I think he averages sort of 13 games a season since he turned pro. So he has the skill, the talent to be a huge player for us, kind of that sort of Wesley Houlihan type figure that we've been missing since Wes left last summer. but it's a big question mark over his fitness and whether he can stay fit. So I guess that's kind of the risk that you have when you've got that small budget. You have to roll the dice a little bit on, getting a player that, if they were able to sort of sustain the fitness, would be out of your league. And sort of marry the two. We did it last year with a couple of names, Thomas obviously in January, but Okunabire and a few others, and it didn't pay off last year. But if he can stay fit, he could be a huge player for us.
Yeah, I think you want to, with those injury risks, you want to take them, keep them to a minimum. I can definitely see the logic in taking one or two gambles, or two or three. But you saw Oxford down the road. They recruited 4 or 5 injury-prone players last summer, and the injury-prone players got injured, and it is a bit of a gamble that sometimes doesn't pay off. So you've got to be careful with that. But Jack, I want to come to you on another player. He's has had that reputation in the past and sort of came through it a little bit last year, I would suggest, in Jack Lancaster, because I think towards the end of the season, he found some really good form.
Yeah, he's kind of like steadily improving, and it's quite a slow process, but I'm glad that we've bared with him. I think he can be a player that, if, like you say, he avoids those injuries and, can get consistent game time, he could be a really big player for us and really, start to carry the team. We've not seen that enough from him, and there have been games where he's gone missing, but I think that's kind of partly confidence and partly getting that momentum going. He wasn't in the team a lot at the in the first half of the season, or he wasn't getting enough starts, and there was quite a lot of, I think he was quite vocal about that, and it was quite obvious that he was frustrated, but he kind of didn't really merit it. And we had a really good start to the season, actually. If you think back, it started quite well. So I think he kind of has bided his time. He's proved his worth to a point, but I think this season is kind of make or break for him as far as League One goes. If the first half of the season doesn't go particularly well, then that could be kind of his way out of League One, whether it's with Cambridge United or not. But I do think, it's a big season for him, and it could be really instrumental to our kind of how well we do. If he can contribute and get those goal contributions that we know he can do, it could be a really good season.
Let's hope that's the case. Talking of left footers, Jordan, you've got 5 left backs, 5 players who, let me rephrase that, 5 players who could play left back this season, sort of 3 that would be sort of obvious picks for that position. And then you've also got James Brophy, who could play left back, and you've got technically Liam Bennett could play left back, although I'd expect him to play right back, even though he's left footed. So it's an interesting sort of balance of the squad. Do you expect there's a possibility that 1 or 2 of those could be offloaded?
No, I don't think so. Obviously, like you say, Brophy and Bennett, whilst they can play there, they'll be elsewhere on the pitch. Do you know what? I've just remembered we've got Houndstrap on the books. Yeah, I think he might be. I think he might be the obvious name to move on and sort of going further up the pitch on the left hand side. I remember we've got Jana as well. That just goes to show what it's like as a Cambridge fan. We signed these guys last summer, and they've barely played or had any impact on us. So sort of forgetting that they exist. So would love for them to come to the fore this season and shut me right up. But I think those 2 names that I've just mentioned, one of whom can play left back and one who's sort of a wide left sort of forward, I think we might be looking at moving them on. Maybe Jana, because he's young, perhaps a loan, to see if we can sort of do a bit of a Liam Bennett and get some games and improve. But that just goes to sum up our season last year. We sort of, I can't remember the stats now, but if you total up the minutes that the summer transfer players played, it's barely anything. Left back was certainly an interesting position for us last season. I think we can look back at it now because we survived and chuckle a little bit, but we seem to get through quite a few over the course of the season. So maybe Bono will be a little bit apprehensive about that and worried that lightning might strike twice and he'll need to get through 6 left backs again. But I'm guessing probably not. And I would imagine that Houndstrap would probably be looked to move on because you're not going to move Dunk on. The guy's a legend, so he'll be here. He'll be here to the end.
Is he still a good a decent League One player though, Joe? I mean, people say he sort of played a big part towards the end of the season, but there's part of me that's a little bit cautious that Harrison Dunk's been at Cambridge since, I want to say the Ice Age. It's a long time, and I do wonder sometimes how much does sentimentality have a bearing in terms of the judgment of players in terms of their current ability.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to question that. I think it's it's difficult for a Cambridge fan to speak ill of the man because, he's going into his 13th season with us. He's chasing down the record appearance number. And yeah, that balmy final 10 games of the season where he popped up with 2 or 3 crucial goals. The form increased when he came back in. I think he got injured sort of Christmas time, January time. So is it a coincidence that the forming improved when he came back? Potentially. I think he's key to keep in the squad, even if he's not a starter, because we've been on this big journey as a club, from the conference into League Two, and in League Two through COVID and into League One. And gradually those players that were part of that journey have moved on. So, Liam O'Neill went in the summer and Greg Taylor went in the summer. And I just wonder if there's something about having Dunk around the squad and around the training ground that kind of brings in that, those kind of things that you can't really measure on the pitch, but sort of, the leadership and the unity and, the way he played last season.
You've got to find new leaders though, Jordan, as well, which is why I'm a little bit, because I look at somebody like Paul Digby, and I think there's no question he's still a very consistent League One midfielder. Whereas I look at Harrison Dunk. Would you necessarily want a veteran playing at left back, considering the physical demands, or sometimes you'll play? I don't know. I'm sort of a little bit on the fence with that one.
Yeah, definitely. It's, you're right to question it. And the age thing is an interesting one because, obviously we've got Michael Morrison, who's sort of mid to late 30s. Rumour is that Ryan Bennett will be signing this week, who again is in his mid 30s. So got quite an ancient back four, if you include Dunk in there. I said at the end of last season that Dunk was, club man of the year, player of the year, man of the moment. But in the summer, I would look to sign a first choice left back. And I guess that's probably because there are some doubts around, one, Dunk's quality, but also, can he do it week in, week out? Has had injuries and things like that as well. So I'm very glad that we have jumped on a left back, even though some fans were surprised that we did sign one.
Jack?
You're on mute, mate.
Sorry, your mic's turned off.
I was blowing my nose. Sorry, lads. I can't say any different. Like we've shown time and again where we've signed some unknown youngster or someone who's kind of coming through the book somewhere, and it hasn't really worked. And experience in our whole journey has told and really done as well. So like Jordan said, Morrison, Ryan Bennett, older players. Where's Houlihan? Perfect example. Players coming in who maybe on the face of it past their best have done a fantastic job for us. And that Football League experience has really told. And I think, whilst we can get the use out of them, I think also Dunk is great in the dressing room. We're not resting all of our laurels on him. Paul Digby is the leader on the pitch, but Harrison Dunk shows real experience. He shows real, care towards the players. I imagine afterwards, if he doesn't go on to do, a highly successful job, which he definitely could do, out of football, I imagine he could definitely stay on and be involved with Cambridge United. And on the left back thing, Brandon Houndstrup hasn't been assigned a squad number. So I'd imagine he will be on his way out the door. So, I think having Harrison Dunk in there, he can deputise quite easily, and he's quite versatile still, and he's still incredibly fit. We saw him up and down that left-hand side a lot last season, and he didn't look out of place. He stuck at it. And as you say, it doesn't really matter who gets those goals, but the fact that he popped up with just quite, 2 or 3 important goals when it mattered, you can't buy that. And there's no need, there'd be no reason to get rid of him at the moment. So yeah, long may it continue.
Talking of fullbacks, I've got a bit of a debate that I'm hoping is going to separate you two. I'm hoping you might have to meet in the centre of Cambridge to have little fisticuffs over this. After we'll see. Liam Bennett. This is a really interesting conversation that I want to come on to, which is when he was first loaned out to Walsall, I was kind of caught in two minds on this, because on the one hand, I think I really admire the fact that the club showed the vision to actually do something that's right for a player's long-term development, even if it might cost them a little bit in terms of squad depth in the short term, because had Liam Bennett stayed on, he would have been a really useful player to have in the squad. And what he subsequently did in the second half of the season was a massive part in keeping Cambridge up. So my question to the panel really is, is the decision to loan Liam Bennett out for the first half of last season vindicated because the version of Liam Bennett that you got back was even better and played a massive part in keeping you up? Or does the fact that he made that impact maybe actually add more question to the decision to loan him out when he could have become that player for a whole season?
Do you want me to start, Jack? Or
yeah, you go first, mate.
I think what's important to remember is the drop-off in form of George Williams from the season before to last season. His first season with the club was arguably player of the season. He didn't win it. Dimi Mitov did. But for a lot of people, he was the best player. He was experienced in League One. With a lot of players last year, the performance levels dropped off, and we could probably spend hours sort of debating why that was. But I think a really key thing for us last year was Williams' drop in form. So at the time, at the start of the season, sort of loaning Bennett out, it did seem like the right thing to do because you had a first choice right back there that he wasn't going to dislodge. I think it was the right thing to do. I stand by that. I actually thought the debate that you were going to start between Jack and I is Liam Bennett as good as people think he is, because he's very good.
My God, how could you? Sacrilege.
Well, he's
blasphemy. I absolutely love Liam Bennett.
I said in our end of season pod that he's got the touch of the Trent about him. He's very good going forward, but he's definitely got questions at the back.
And he's so tenacious. I absolutely love him. I think he could be one of the best right backs in the league next season. I really do.
I hope you're right. But keep an eye on goals that we concede, because it felt like January onwards, whether we're playing 3 at the back or 4 at the back, that right-hand side and him and the space he leaves when he pushed forward was being targeted by clubs. So I think he is good. I do think he is as good as people say he is, but he certainly has kind of an element around the way he plays, which can bring on dangers as well as sort of rewards.
Could I give you a quick riposte to that, which is the right of the back 3 for Cambridge last season was Michael Morrison, who I think is best in the middle of a back 3. Mm-hmm. So I reckon it's probably an element of that. I think that if you're playing a back 3 with wing backs, you want your right-sided centre back to be quite athletic and ideally good on the ball. And I reckon, although Michael Morrison played a huge part in what Cambridge did in terms of defending balls into the box, I don't think the wide centre-back is necessarily his specialist area. So I would probably throw that into the equation as well.
Yeah, it's a very good point. The other things to consider are another player whose form dropped off last year was Jabril Kadina, who can play sort of right back or right side of.
I was expecting him to have a much better season than he did. Like him and Harvey Nibbs to an extent. A couple of players that I really thought would kick on.
Yeah, well, we made some pre-season predictions at the start of last year, and one of them was that Okadina would be a championship player by this time. The form's dropped off; it didn't match it, and I personally don't think we'll go back to 3 at the back. So I don't think we'll ever see this sort of this point resolved. But at the time, yeah, I think Morrison had to play on the right-hand side because of who was available or not available and the form. So, yeah, I think you've got a good point about sort of the cover there for Bennett. But we also saw it when we played 4 at the back as well. So I'm hoping to be proved wrong this season.
Yeah, that was a long opening point.
I'm wrong, Swindle.
Liam Bennett. I think hindsight in football is a wonderful thing, isn't it? You can say a million things and say, I was right, I said this at the time. To be honest, Liam Bennett had showed flashes of what he could do before he went out to Walsall, but we'd only seen a few games of him, really. And I think, I don't think it's like a selfless good deed loaning a player out like that. I think it's, there's a purpose to it. He got game time. There was many fans calling for him to be recalled early, but I mean that happens when you're playing crap. Like you need a player. You
limit yourself a little bit. Like I totally take Jordan's point on board that Williams did have a fantastic season last year, but you are leaving yourselves a little bit short. Like it only would have taken one right back to George Williams, never mind form, and then you're all of a sudden. So I feel like, I don't know, I'm not sure it's what I would have done in that situation, but I also kind of admire that Mark Bonner. I admire what Mark Bonner did in terms of being able to see the big picture and have that sort of thought process, and also the fact that the club gave him the stability to be able to have that thought process in the first place. So I'm a bit torn on it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I probably agree with you to a point. I think we are a small squad, and we kind of operate like that and have done for quite a number of years. Really, we've never been blessed with too many players. We don't actually loan very many players out unless they're very young. So to see, he's still on the young side, but to see a senior player that go out is fairly rare, unless they're proven to be rubbish. And we've had a couple of them, but less said about them the better. But yeah, I think, to be honest, Liam Bennett benefited from his loan to Walsall personally, and it benefited Cambridge United when it came back. And you look back on this in 10 years' time, and no one will remember it really. If he's playing, wherever he's playing, Championship, Premier League, no one will be like, oh, Cambridge United made this mistake loaning him out to Walsall for half a season. It's just about his career progression, and it's benefited Cambridge United. We stayed up, the job's done. I don't think there's really going to be too much focus on it. I think it's more about looking forward with Liam Bennett, and I do agree with Jordan. I think he's fantastic, bit of a Rolls-Royce player going forward, but you do have to keep an eye on him at the back, and he's not big. There was a couple of times last season he gets beaten with balls over the top. He looked a little bit kind of disconcerted when balls were coming over the top and a little bit out of position. So he's got a bit of learning to do, in a defensive manner, but we may see him kind of develop into a different position or just kind of grow as a player. So he's still young. He's still got talent that needs to be nurtured. And I think Cambridge United is the right place for him to do that. And he's got great support. And that's why I think that experience, that age of the players around him, I don't think it's an issue. I actually think it's a benefit. They've got so much experience under their belts. They know what they're doing, and they can kind of help him along in what will be, I'm sure, a tricky journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Jordan, let's talk about quality out wide, because I don't feel like there's this squad is oozing with it. Maybe you could put Jack Lancaster in that category, although he seems to have certainly drifted in quite a lot and even plays the number 10 at times. Do you feel like this squad is going to need some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got questions over, who is going to play in those wide positions and why. We saw Okunabire play wide left at times last year when he did play. I personally would play him more as a central striker.
Yeah.
Lancaster was played out wide, but looked better in the 10 role. Thomas could play out wide, but looks better centrally. So I think the wide forwards is a big area that needs to be targeted this transfer window. I think we need at least two, and one of them needs to be a starting one. Obviously, we let a few go in the summer, people like Shiloh Tracy and so forth. So I guess it depends on his formation and his tactics going into the new year. But I would be surprised if we move away from that 4-5-1 variant, which needs a couple of wide players. So yeah, it's a big gap in my opinion, Gav, one that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, I totally agree. I want to come to you, Jack, about Faye Okunabire, who Jordan mentioned, because I remember watching him at Shrewsbury in the 18-19 season. He had a real purple patch, I think, midway through that campaign. And I remember thinking he's someone I wouldn't mind at my team, Birmingham, because he was quick, he was strong, he had an eye for goal, he was good on both feet, he was unpredictable, such an exciting player. And then I think he had a spell under... I don't necessarily feel like Sam Ricketts' management necessarily got the best out of him. And then he had a bit of a downward trajectory, few years, maybe a couple of injuries. I think he maybe had a history of one or two before he came to Cambridge. And obviously last season was tricky. But a little bit like we've discussed, Jack, with Jack Stevens, is this a bit of a Bonner project where if you can lighten up the fire within Okunabire and that potential that he showed a few years ago, granted that it is going back about 4 years now, is there a bit of hope that he might be able to come good?
I really hope so, mate. We signed him injured, which is never a good sign. And I think, he's had a couple of injury layoffs already. I think he's shown real, tiny glimpses of what he can do. And, like you say, if we can get that going, it'll be quite beneficial for the team. I really hope he's not going to be one of those kind of Cambridge United quiz answers in a few years' time when you're trying to name a squad and he's the one you forget. Because at the moment, we haven't seen enough from him to kind of benefit. But it looks like from our squad list this season, he's certainly going to feature pretty heavily if we don't bolster our squad. So I hope we're not relying on him to be our kind of, line leader and starting every week. But if he is, this is the season. It's the make or break for him. And I don't want to put my neck on a line too much, but I think if he plays how he played last season and just doesn't get enough game time like he did, he may well even go in January, depending on how we look. So it really is make or break for him, and we need to see quite a lot from him.
Yeah, I think it's very much last chance saloon for him in terms of League One. I think if next 5 months don't go to plan, then I think he's looking at a rebuild in League Two at most. Jordan, let's talk youth, because I think one of the positives from Cambridge's season last year was how the under-18s performed, especially Kai Yearn, and then even more generally, Mamadou Job. I've heard some quite good things over the last couple of years from him in terms of how he's progressed on loan in the non-league scene. You've obviously got Lewis Simper, who's broken through into midfield. I think he started at Derby. So there's it seems like the academy is reasonably productive. Is there anyone in particular that you've got your eye on? Is Kai Yearn the main one?
Yearn's the main one. Job is also one that is very highly touted. Glenn McConnell, Nascimento to us, is another one that is quite exciting. Really stole the show when we played Arsenal in the quarterfinals, I think it was, of the FA Cup last season at the Emirates. Has a bit of sort of a Grealish-esque kind of sort of presence on the pitch with his socks down. Say it again.
What's his name again?
Glenn McConnell.
Glenn McConnell. Right, okay.
But I think the issue with all of them, with the exception of Yearn, is the problem is we're in League One, so it's harder for them to sort of embed into the squad. So I would be surprised if any of them are in the matchday squad when we start the season. I think Simper would really benefit from game time, and I hope we find a loan for him. I guess that all depends on how we do with finding other central midfielders, because he ended up being a starting central midfielder for a chunk of the early part of last season due to injuries. So I think Simper's more embedded. He's slightly older. I think he's ready to sort of have a bit like Bennett did at some time away, half a season, either like a top conference club or League Two. He's probably the most progressed. I think Yearn probably needs a loan to maybe the conference as well, but they're all young lads. So I think in the next few years we'll see them breaking into the squad, but I think this season might be a tiny bit early for them.
On the flip side to that, though, Jack, you look at someone like Kai Yearn, who's had recognition. England, I think it's up to under 20s level, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, that's huge talent. I mean, I would probably say, if I'm in Cambridge's shoes, if you want to get the best value for players, because that's what Cambridge have got to do if they want to stabilise at this level, they've got to sell big assets. I think you've got to be quite brave in terms of the progression plan and quite ambitious and try and blood them into the first team early, because although there's definitely a chance that it is too much too soon, like Jordan says, and it is a bit too early, the flip side is that if they are able to hit the ground running and show that potential, then their value is going to be much higher than if they come into the team in a couple of years after 2 or 3 loans. So that's kind of how I would look at it. I would say try and blood him in, at least give him a chance to show what he can do in pre-season and across August, maybe in the couple of cup competitions, and then load him out to the National League if you feel like it comes to that. But for me, I think you've got to be quite brave, considering that you've got this talented crop of young players. Give them their opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, Yearn's been blooded a little bit in the Pizza Cup and scored against Oxford in that. And yeah, has featured a very little bit. I think the main point on players like Yearn, especially, and even looking at Liam Bennett, I think the point about getting them loaned out is to teach them the physicality of the game, because I think the difference between something like England under-20s and League Two, League One football is the physicality. And you often see quite young players come in and just get a bit overwhelmed by how physical the game is and just keeping up with that part of it. Obviously, they've got the ability, they've got the pace, they've got the skill, but you can see young players like that coming in and getting bullied out of the game, and it can affect your career progression quite a lot because it's a confidence thing. And I think part of the loan idea is they go out to a lower level, get the confidence. You saw Glenn McConnell went to St Albans last season, scored for them a few times, featured heavily. It was a really successful spell for him, and I think that's why. And I think it's really, it's a confidence thing, but it's still physical down there, so they still learn it, but the level's just a bit lower, so then they can come back, feel like they know what they're up against, in League One, and then, then play. But I think it's the process that Cambridge United seem to do. We don't seem to kind of introduce these youth players too young, and like Simper, like Jordan said, is in the squad and featured this season, but again, he was out on loan for part of it. So I think it's kind of how Cambridge United manage it. Different teams manage it differently, but like you say, sometimes you've got to take the gamble. And I think with Kai Yearn, I'd be surprised if we didn't see him, at some point this season. But I think Jordan's probably right. I think if we find an option or two more that come in, I imagine Yearn will go back out on loan because he's still very young, 18 years old. So it is the time. You're right. It is the time. I wouldn't be surprised to see another loan spell for at least the first half of the season.
Yeah, that model that you've talked about, I can see how that has definitely benefited Cambridge in the last few years, and how Mark Bonner has tended to go culture first in terms of creating a really strong, tight-knit environment. And I can see how he's benefited from that. And I can see the benefit also of giving players an opportunity in non-league before they make that step up, so they know the physicality. There's also, though, part of me that's looking at this and thinking Cambridge United have got to find other means of gaining resources and wealth, because I think if you stick with this sort of culture-led strategy for too long, what you find is that when the core breaks up and when the core declines, you actually can struggle sometimes to fill some of those voids because you've not generated the capital to reinvest. Mm-hmm. And that's where it kind of worries me if you leave it too long. I'm not sure about that. For me, I think you've got to try and be. There comes a time where you've got to be a little bit brave in terms of introducing players. That's just how I would feel about it.
We're an interesting team and an interesting city. Like the football team here isn't as kind of central to the city as it is in other places. We're a university city first, and then the football club. It's kind of out of the city. It's sure. Almost an afterthought. We've got quite a small, fan base considering the size of the city. And I think the way that the teams run, we're financially stable for the first time in my lifetime, I think, really. And it shows that the team are kind of, there's a whole club rebuild going on, and there's a kind of an ethos being built around the club, and it's bigger than just the match day, and it's bigger than just the 16 players that are selected in the squad. And I think it's all kind of a process that's going to take years. And I think part of it is the youth setup, and that's improving. In the past 5-10 years, that's improved massively, and there's more money being invested. There's better players coming through, and I think the process, like you say, it might change. We might start seeing some 17-year-olds featured in the first team, but I think the way the process is going, I think Cambridge United are quite careful with how they, they're not sticking to old timey processes or anything, but I think they kind of have a manual, and they're going through it, and they're quite meticulous in how they manage. And I don't feel like we've lacked in benefit from having players out on loan. I think there will come a time where this squad will expire and we'll have to rebuild again. And I don't think that's many years coming. I think, even next summer might be another rebuild, depending on where Cambridge United end up next year. But I think, it's trust the process is a horribly overused phrase. I think we've all got to trust the process a bit.
Yeah, I don't 100% agree with you on everything there, Jack, but I appreciate where you're coming from. Certainly an interesting conversation. Let us know in the comments what you think about the strategy. But certainly, I think we can all agree that the way Cambridge United have gone about things has been a huge part in what they've achieved over the last 3 years. So, well done to them on from that perspective. I want to come to you then, Jordan, about how many more additions do you think is going to be needed between now and the end of the window?
Oh, I'd like quite a few, I think. I think Bonner said at the start of the summer he was looking for 7 to 8. We've signed 3, so that means he's sort of probably looking at a minimum of sort of 4 to 5. I actually think we probably need more than that. I think we need sort of 6 to 7 all across the pitch, really. We need a starting centre-back. I mentioned it earlier that the rumour is Bennett is re-signing, which would be great. I think we need cover on the right-hand side of defence.
Gibson Rossi still there?
Rossi's still there, and I have a feeling that if Bennett does re-sign, I think our starting centre backs would be Rossi and Bennett and not Morrison. Just an inkling, but yeah, if
I
Bennett
think
gets
Bennett and Morrison as a pairing would be a bit samey, wouldn't it? You'd be caught out with balls in behind and things like that.
It's interesting. It's interesting because you'd think that, and you think they'd struggle, but then that was the starting pair for most of that sort of 10-game run that got the points to see us across the line. So maybe that was a flash in the pan. Maybe people will be more prepared for that next season. There's always that sort of age-old cliche about, experience buys you a few yards. So maybe that's what they'll do. But I think we'll need one more addition if we do sign Bennett. So I think we need a centre back. I think we need a right back, not a starting right back. I think, I'm backing Bennett, Liam Bennett, that is, to be the main man at right back, but I think he needs cover. And then going forward, honestly, I think we need addition after addition after addition there. Starting central midfielder, probably a starting striker.
Definitely a creative midfielder for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So my worry is it's the start of July and there's only 3 that have come in. You see names and things rumored, and then you see them sort of joining clubs that are kind of similar-ish size to us.
Sure.
And you think, is this summer, history repeating itself? Are we having the same problems that we had last summer where we just couldn't get the right bodies through the door, and then it's a bit of a panic at the end of the window to try and get someone, and you end up signing players who either have risks around them, sort of, fitness and injury risks, or players that perhaps just aren't quite ready for League One. So yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant at this moment in time that the summer is sort of echoing how we did last year, but there is obviously a long way to go before we start the season. So I won't write us off just yet, but I think there is bare minimum another 4 needed, but I would like more than that, another 6 or 7, I think.
I'm kind of hoping that Cambridge United's kit release, which is coming this week, is going to be announced by 4 new signings. That's the pipe dream that I've got. But yeah, I think Jordan's right. We are grossly understaffed at the moment, and we literally can't go into the season with this squad. We need bare minimum 5 players, probably more like 7 or 8. And I do think there's the questions would be raised. Transfer windows never go quite to plan, whoever you are. I think, people always lose out on signings. But what we need to have is contingency in place. There needs to be other players, and some of whom will come in, and there'll be massive question marks raised over them. I'm sure. At this level, sometimes you pick up a player from League Two who hasn't featured much, or it's, a bit of a flop. But we will have to get bodies through the door, and some of them will hit, and some of them will miss. But we at the moment we are just so understaffed.
Yeah, and I think for Cambridge, it's kind of a mix of balancing the concerns over the squad and the fact that right now, as we record right now, there are, it is a thin squad that's probably looking a bit low on quality in certain areas, with the fact that it is Mark Bonner, the fact that he does have this connection with Cambridge United, the fact that he is one of the best managers in the league, that you'd be happy to go toe-to-toe with any manager in the league with Mark Bonner at the helm, because I'm really impressed with how in the second half of last season, in high pressure moments, the way I watched a lot of his interviews and the way he sort of kept his nerve, even talking about really significant things, the way he kept his calm, the way he stayed true to who he is, the way he was able to still have a bit of a laugh and a joke at times and keep everyone relaxed whilst knowing what was required. Outstanding leadership. So I'm sure there's a lot of confidence from the majority of the Amber Army that in Mark Bonner, but I don't think that confidence should translate into complacency, because actually there are shortcomings in the squad, and we saw that with 3 wins in 27 at one stage last season. So he needs to be supported.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we went into that run of form, like the stats that you mentioned there, with Bonner with a lot of credit in the bank, and I think that dried up for quite a chunk of the fan base. I think it's probably been replenished slightly, given that we got over the line in the end. But I do think that the season that we're going into, he probably might not be as untouchable as he has been at previous points in his sort of time with the club. And so with that in mind, I think he'll be very keen to move us forward and learn from last year. I think one of the issues that we had last year was sort of the resilience in the squad. That was always a Bonner thing, even in the League Two promotion year, if there was a bad result, we seemed to bounce back. And we were very streaky in League One the season before last. And we would always be able to find a draw somewhere or something like that to sort of, just calm the nerves slightly. And last year, I can't remember now, but it feels like a huge number of games were lost by 1 goal margin. So I think you mentioned fine lines earlier in the call. I think that was a real big thing for the club last season. So sure. I think he'll be looking to sort of to act on that. And in terms of support from the club, I think it's really clear, given who we've signed so far, they're looking for a player that has played this level before. Even if they're young, they're looking for that League One experience, because when we brought in the likes of Bennett, Morrison and McGrandles in January, it had the lift on the rest of the squad. So that's where I think he'll be looking for support this summer from the board and so forth.
Hopefully he gets it. I've got a question for the two of you. Which of the two of you do you think is the more optimistic Hughes fan?
Swindle.
Me. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So I've got one question that's optimistic, and one. I'll give you, Jordan, the one that's more cautious. But starting with you, Jack, what would be the reason to have a huge amount of belief in Cambridge United kicking on, doing well next season, and finishing in the comfort of mid-table?
The state of the club, I think, mate. I think the way that we're run and just how the club is sitting at the moment, there's a lot to be optimistic about. We own the land, the grounds on, which is quite a recent development and has been up in the air for a long time. There's, really good infrastructure. We're financially stable. We've got a great manager who's, lauded by a number of clubs, and we've got a good base squad. I'm stretching a bit there, but I think there's plenty to be optimistic about. And if a month down the line we've recruited a bit more, we go into a successful pre-season, welcoming players like Adam May back, I do think there's a lot to be optimistic about. And League One is a tough old league, but I think League One this season is easier than League One last season, by a margin. So I think there is, cautious optimism. We deal with being, written off every season. So let the pundits do it.
I had you 10th last year. You let me down the one time. What's that mean? You had one job.
But I think there's plenty to be optimistic about cautiously, and it's all in the next month and a half, really, mate. But I'm looking forward to the season for sure. It's nice to have a break, but I want to get all this ridiculous cricket out of the way now.
I was going to chime in, and if Swindle didn't mention it, I was also going to say I think League One is a weaker division this year.
I completely agree with you, Jordan. Definitely weaker. I think because you've lost Ipswich and Sheffield Wednesday and Plymouth Argyle, who are such a smart club, and they got 96 plus points, those three clubs. So to lose them, and I think it's going to be a bit of a transitional period off the pitch, certainly for a lot of the clubs coming down. So I think you're bang on to make that point. I'm going to give you the slightly more cautious question, I'll call it, Jordan, which is what will be the reason to be worried about Cambridge for next season in terms of, are they going to be in a relegation dogfight again?
I think we will be in and around it. I don't feel bad saying it. I think it's just reality. No. I think money talks and the budget dictates that we will be in that, that bottom 8 group of clubs that are sort of trying to sort of stay up. I think our first season in League One was glorious. We were long safe by sort of like February, March time, and we could put our feet up and enjoy it and could enjoy going to big grounds and so forth. I think that time has come and gone. I think the reason to sort of be pessimistic is, the budget is small. It's the 2nd of July as we talk, and the squad rebuild is way off where it should be. I will try and pick that up a little bit by saying, I do think the division's a bit weaker, and I think, we've seen clubs lose key players, and I think we'll see teams maybe do bit of a Cambridge and have a difficult second season as well. And,
Sure.
and I think, to be positive, the clubs that have come up, their sort of profile and spending isn't hugely different from ours. So it's not like, there's sort of a big shift in that kind of sort of dynamic. So I'd be pessimistic because of the budget and the work that's needed on the squad, but I do think we will still compete. I don't think we'll be, touch wood, I don't think we'll be cut off and down by Christmas. Yeah. We'll be very competitive, probably more competitive than last season.
Yeah, well, let's certainly hope that's the case. Listen, gents, it's been such a pleasure talking about the U's with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. Jordan, what are your plans for the Under the Abbey Stand podcast for next season?
Oh, good question. Hopefully to have more positive pods released each week. There was a real long period of the season where it was just a slog on the Sunday to get through that recording. I think we were quite, not all of us on the pod. I think there's about 6 of us. I think a few of us were backing Bonner and a few of us weren't. So there was a little bit of kind of sort of division there on people that listen and then feedback and so forth. But yeah, the plans for the pod, as always, weekly catch-ups on United and previews of our next games involving fans from other clubs, and hopefully a bit more positivity thrown into the mix.
Let's hope that's the case. Jack, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Likewise, Jordan. This has been EFL Debate, the Cambridge United Summer Deep Dive. Go and subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify and check out the other Summer Deep Dives across the EFL. Thanks to you for watching at home. We'll see you again very soon.